Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, my name is Adrian Simple. I run a Lexi flash briefing called the Gaming Observer. About a year ago, I found out about these smart speakers and Lexi and I'm saying Lexi because I don't want to activate people's devices, but it's Alexa. Um, and she told me about this flash briefing feature where you're just getting your news in about 2 or 3 minutes. And I thought that was a really, really great idea. So I ordered one for myself, and I was like, let's go. I want to learn about video games, right? I saw CNN and I saw all the usual news outlets, but I wanted to learn about video games, and then there was nothing there. I was like, oh my goodness, how is nobody doing this? So I just started one up on my own, and then within a week, I had a couple dozen people listening to me without any sort of uh, how do like marketing or advertising or anything like that. They just naturally appeared. And then now 1 year later, I've got over 1,000 daily listeners, over 350 Amazon reviews, which blows my mind every single day. And yeah, I just all I do is I come home every night and I talk about video games into a microphone, and people want to listen. So that's what I've been doing. That's awesome. Yeah, no worries. Sorry, just very quickly, let me jump in. Did you say that the app recommended it to you? Oh, interesting. Okay. See, I didn't even know that there were people coming in through that avenue, so that's really cool. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quite it's not as easy as setting up a YouTube channel, but it does take some sort of an hour or two of setup. And if you're unfamiliar with technology in general or using computers a lot, it might take a little longer than that. You have some learning to do. But like in the grand scheme of things, it's actually really simple. There's no coding required. And so, if there's anyone who does want to start their own flash briefing, who's interested in a certain niche or a certain topic or whatever, it's actually really easy. All you need is a microphone, which could be as simple as your phone, or anything that you really have lying around. The audio quality isn't of utmost importance at that point. And then all you have to do is you have to go onto sort of the Lexi website or the Amazon documentation, and then you set up your developer account, and then it has a template where you can just click Flash Briefing, and then it kind of takes you through step by step the things that you need, and you just put in your title and all of that stuff. And then the part where it kind of gets a little tricky is you have to have like a text file with very specific instructions. But like I said, if you go to their documentation, it guides you through that whole process. And I went into it knowing no coding whatsoever, any no programming or anything like that. And I've even picked up a little, like a few skills here and there. But ultimately, you don't need anything. And it's totally free. You don't have to pay for anything other, unless you want like a fancy mic or something like that. But it's totally free. The only thing, like, if you don't, that's the ideal if you're going to be uploading every single night. So if you're covering news specifically, where you're covering like the latest breaking stories, you want it'll be free. If you want scheduling, so you want to be like, okay, I've batch uploaded 10 audio files because maybe you do like a tip of the day or something like that. You can learn some programming to schedule, which is a whole other step. And Alexa doesn't really give you that documentation. So you'd have to find that on your own. So then the other option is if you don't want to do it on your own, you don't want to have like you just kind of want someone to handle it all for you. There are some podcast services where normally where you go to upload the podcast, they also have created like a flash briefing feature, so they'll set it up all for you. There's also some flash briefing specific services where there's like a free tier, and then if you want extra stuff, you can pay more for like a monthly subscription or something like that. So there's also paid options where you can just go completely hands off, not worry about anything, and just all you have to do is create your audio and upload it to whatever site or whatever service that you subscribe to. So
That's really cool. I mean, I realize I've been told that my mic was muted all along, so
oh
I've unmuted my mic. I hope everything's okay now. Basically, you've been answering my questions so well that I'm pretty sure people got what I asked you.
yeah,
So you've been going on for a little bit more than a year, right?
yeah, just over a year. Yeah.
So can you tell me a bit more about the process that you've gone through? So first, what's your current format? What was your initial format? And kind of like what were the key decisions that you had to make throughout your journey?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because if you were to, I have my archive up on YouTube, and if you go back to some of the earliest episodes, it's actually really similar to the format that I have today. There's an introduction welcoming you to the show, then I cover 3 to 4 stories in the gaming world, and then I say, okay, goodbye, folks, see you tomorrow, right? So that format is something I established like really early on, but it's also like an important step to take, right? It's important to iterate. It's important to come up with new ideas. I've tried different formats before and found out that I don't like them, right? But there are so many other flash briefings that, they have this idea that you have to stick to this one format, right? And we're so early in this process now that, you know, if you want your flash briefing to go 8 minutes, even though most of them are 1 to 3, you can, right? You can try that, and if it's what's best for your content, then that's what you want to do. But anyway, yeah. So very early on, I took the basically 2 minute approach. I did about 2 minutes. And then I found out that I was really rushing through the stories, and then there was a lot of me just talking to the audience, but not talking about video games. So I decided at some point I needed to lengthen it out a bit. So now I am between somewhere 3 and 4 minutes. So that's like the biggest sort of change that you'll see. Yeah, but I mean, like otherwise, if you're looking at like specifically the format of the show, it really it stayed pretty true through the whole thing. The other thing is I've kind of changed the approach to as I've learned more about the gaming industry. I've really changed the type of content that I'm covering. Very early on, it was like my sources were like Reddit, right, and what I would see on social media. And maybe like here or there, I would go to the Kotaku or something like that. But now I've curated sort of my list of sources. I go through every single day. I pick and choose the stories that I want to talk about from the sources, right, or even from the press releases if they've been sent to me directly, and then format my story from there. So the stories have become a little bit more. I don't want to say sophisticated, but like less surface level. It's a lot more deep now. I'm doing things like data analytics. So like when the financials come out for the quarterlies, I'll be covering those. I cover like social like activism. So if we're talking about unions and work proper workforce like labor and stuff like that, I'm covering topics like that. So just a little more in depth with the stories. But that's just a natural sort of evolution of how I what I became interested in and what sources became available to me. Um, Other than that, yeah, I mean, honestly, it hasn't changed much. But if you're thinking about starting your own flash briefing, there are a lot of things to consider, and you have to be okay also with changing and going with the flow and iterating. Um, for things like length, for content, for music, for anything, right? So
Yeah. So that's really interesting, and I think a lot of people could be interested in starting their own flash briefings, and I think uh, it's cool when you think about where we are now in terms of technology and where you are as well in terms of kind of like where you are in your life. So you mentioned that you're quite young. You're still in university, which is the case for most of our listeners as well. They're either
okay,
in university or in college, so high school
okay,
if you're in the US.
awesome.
So how do you manage to kind of like merge your university life with this what started as a side project? Now I'm guessing now is quite a big part of your life.
The balance is really something. Um, because I cover news and I'm recording every single day, that means I'm in university and I'm not going out in the evenings to party or hang out with friends or anything like that, right? When I started doing this show, it took about 3 hours to put together the show. I've now sort of whittled it down to a solid hour and a half. But yeah, when it comes to balancing this and life, it can be quite difficult. You really have to be committed, and you really have to push your way through it. But I ended up doing that, and now I've seen at least some modicum of success, right? So the balance is difficult, but at the same time, once you get into the groove of things, once you start to understand what your show is, what's and what kind of content your audience is interested in listening to, the more that you can really refine that process. And a lot, it becomes a lot easier for me to, once I've been doing this for a year, and my audience has been listening to me for a year. If I say, "Hey, I need to take a day off because things are getting stressful," my audience understands, right? So the balance is also with finding that relationship with your audience and them forgiving you for taking days off or for doing a limited show, like a shorter show or anything like that. And so that's one aspect to it. Balancing it with your studies is another thing. If you are studying in school, you really need to be on top of things like your homework and things and whatever it is, right? Because you have an hour and a half every single day that you've taken out of your life, right? And when you're in school, it's busy as is. When I'm extremely fortunate because I'm in a theater program in Toronto that's actually quite. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier compared to other programs, and so I have that flexibility. But yeah, like you said, now especially like back then it was just a side project, and now that it's evolved so fast and so heavily, things like changing my schedule around so that I don't have evening classes has become an important thing, right? In the program I'm in, they want you to commit to like an out of school project as well, and I had to tell them like I can't work evenings, even though in the theater world that's like a huge thing. Performances are in the evenings, rehearsals are in the evenings, everything is in the evenings, and I told them, hey, by the way, I need to be home by 7 p.m. every day. So you have to make those sacrifices. But ultimately, for me, it's led me onto a new career path, potentially, hopefully, and it's led me into something that kind of finding a direction that I really cared about, and it's enabled me. Like I've cared about video games my entire life. Theater I've cared about since 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So now I've actually taken something that I really, really care about, and I've been able to make something out of it, right? So if there's somebody out there who's really, really interested in movies or in whatever it is, they can actually make that their career just by talking about it, right? So
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, and maybe they'll allow you to do the gaming observer as your extra project at uni. That'd be cool.
yeah,
Um,
it's something like that. Yeah.
so you mentioned that you kind of do most of your news collating in the evenings. How does a typical day go for you, both in term and out of term, so on holiday?
Oh,
And someone is asking us, what are the sources that you mentioned earlier, and how did you come across them?
okay, yeah. So the sources, um, it's just a collection. It's like an RSS feed of like the top sites. My favorites are Eurogamer, GamesIndustry.biz, Rock Paper Shotgun for the indie games. So it's just like an RSS feed where I scroll through the headlines. I've also subscribed to as many game development companies press release email blasts as I could, so I'm getting them directly into my email as well. So that actually is a good transition segue into your question. So during the school year, well, either way, pretty much it's the same. But I'll go and I'll do my day, and I'll keep my eye on the phone of the news that's going on. So if Jason Schreier from Kotaku just released his latest expose into people being overworked, I have my eye on that during the day, and then I'll read it when I'm on the subway to school or something like that, and I'll get the full however long it takes to read those long things or to get an idea of what the story is. Um, and then when I come home, the process that I have pretty much every day when I'm recording a new episode is I go through the headlines and I tab out whatever I think I might be interested in as I'm looking through the headlines. So then at that point, I have like maybe 10 tabs up. And then I'll read all of the stories and then I'll order them the way that I want them to. I'll basically choose the three or four that I'm most interested in talking about. I pull up a Microsoft OneNote um, notebook and I write my script in there where I talk about the three or four stories that I've selected. I record and then I distribute it online. So, and I edit my audio as I record. So,
No.
like I said before, that process takes about an hour and a half.
Hmm. And considering that you do this mostly every day, day in, day out, How have you found the motivation over the past year of doing this to just keep at it? Because from my personal experience, being able to do something and keep doing it without necessarily having a lot of success or a lot of positive reinforcement can be quite daunting. And at some point, you're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. So in my case, it's just like finding the little successes, and that's what's been keeping me going. But
Mhm.
how was this experience for you?
So early on, the motivation was, holy crap, there's a few dozen people listening to me, and I've been doing this for 2 weeks, right? That it's amazing, but that has continued since, right? People haven't left since I've started. The motivation is the fact that there's 1,200 people that are listening every day, and if I don't send them something, they have nothing to listen to. I mean, okay, they have other things to listen to, but you know what I mean. They're used to having me in their morning routines, right? And so the motivation is it's almost like a pressure in one aspect. But then the other pressure and the other motivation is, I mean, I love talking about video games, right? I love video games. So being able to actually have the opportunity to sit down, look at what's interesting, and then tell you about what's interesting is like that. It's not something that I have to slog through. It's something I look forward to, right? And that's what I think is so great about flash briefings is that you can narrow down so heavily into something you're interested in, that motivation can go. At the same time, like I said, like I also understand that expanding outside of the flash briefings, we were talking about this before we went live. If we look at something like live streaming or YouTube, unique YouTube content, my content on there doesn't get listened to as much, right? There's maybe a 10 people that would listen to that kind of thing or attend for that kind of thing. And so that motivation where there's nobody there, that I can empathize with, right? And in that case, I actually haven't. I don't have an answer for you there because I've seen the success in one avenue and I've just kept going in that avenue, right? So really, I find that motivation through the positive reinforcement of people leaving Amazon reviews, of reaching out on Twitter saying you're such an essential part of my morning, um, and of course by the people in my life that surround me who are so excited for me and who want to see me succeed. Um, Ultimately, it is important to focus on those positives, like you said. There are times where I get a negative Amazon review, and that really brings me down. And then I have to remember that there are 300 other people that have said really great things, right? So it's about finding that balance and focusing on the successes, like you said.
So, one of our moderators saying that they think flash briefings are really handy because a lot of people prefer to have something told to them via voice as opposed to reading through a lot of information, which a lot of the time gets really boring. So, is that something actually that you took into account when you chose voice as a format as opposed to starting your own column or your own news site where you're just like kind of like copy pasting and adding your own take on that?
We as consumers want everything to be easier. That's why voice technology is exploding, is because we don't have to pull out our phone. We just need to speak like we do every day. um, we as consumer and in that same vein, I was not usually someone who was reading articles and who was doing all that. I was finding the podcast or the YouTube that was talking about those articles, right? So that's actually what one of the reasons that I was really latched on to flash briefings is that I had the opportunity to relieve people of having to go search out that news on their own because I could tell it to them and I knew myself enough to know that they could rely on me to tell it to them. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's an essential part of flash briefings. I think that's something that is um, like the main selling feature of it, right? Is the fact that you don't have to do any of the work. You can be drinking your coffee or brushing your teeth in the morning and you got your news, right? And you don't even have to activate it yourself. It could be a morning routine. You say good morning, and then you get your weather, you get your traffic, and you get your gaming news, right? You don't even have to go searching for it because it's already there, you know?
Mhm. So you're also published on YouTube, where it's basically just the same thing, but if anybody wants to listen to you in the background as they're on YouTube, and I think you're on Spotify as well and
Yeah, I'm on
other
podcast.
podcasts. So how did you find that level of adoption as opposed to your main one, your Amazon one?
I mean, it's
And why did you decide to do that? Was it archival? Was it just like having another listener stream?
Um, i- yeah, like it is basically nil, and that's kind of my point that I was making earlier, where it's like there's nobody really listening there, and my content wouldn't survive if it weren't for the flash briefings, right? That's why I'm really excited for this technology. if I was just doing this only on YouTube from the beginning, nobody would be listening, right? So yes, I did start on the YouTube. I think back in October of last year, and I did that for archival purposes in case the website ever went down or I lost the files on my computer or anything like that. But also in that same vein, there are at least 10 people listening there every day because that's their preferred place to listen. And there is also something to be said about organic growth there. There might be someone who stumbles upon the YouTube video, or it's also a lot easier if you don't have a Lexi device yourself. You can tell a friend, hey, there's this really awesome person I'm listening to. Go check out his YouTube channel because they don't have a device, right? So it provides like an easy like gateway to my content. And then I started on podcasts because I had some person be like, can I listen? Like I listen to my shows while I'm driving to work through Spotify or through iTunes podcasts or anything like something like that. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So I just threw my content up on there for anyone who wants to consume it there. And it's also really convenient to have the RSS feed that the podcast services auto generate because there are other platforms out there that want that RSS feed. So
Oh, brilliant, brilliant.
yeah.
So we'll go. Somebody asked about how you verify your sources, but I want us to first, before we go into the deeper things like that, let's talk a bit about tools and kind of like what are the tools that you use. Earlier you mentioned that you can even record sound on your phone if you wanted to publish to something like a flash briefing, but you obviously have tools which are slightly more sophisticated than that. So what do you use?
Like I mentioned earlier, it's actually really simple. You need a computer to be able to upload your audio. You need some kind of software on your computer to record the audio, or software on your phone if you're using your phone. And I don't pay for anything there. I use Audacity, which is a free software audio editing tool. And then you need some kind of microphone. So the microphone I have here is a Audio Technica 2020, USB version. I had a different microphone before, which got destroyed on me, so I had to get this one. But like, if you really want to go super advanced into microphones, like there's so many options out there, and there's so many like different brands creating different kinds of microphone. You really just need to Google like podcast microphones and find out the different kinds and your price range and everything like that. This one has been doing me well because it does well with the acoustics in this room. But long term, it's not something I would want to stick with. If I ever start doing this professionally, I'm looking in the. This was $100 off of like uh, Kijiji, which is like an eBay. But if you look at like long term doing this professionally, I'm looking more in like the $700 to $800 range Canadian. So it depends on what level of professionalism that you want. But ultimately, like I said, like we're so early in the days of flash briefings. Like if you look on YouTube in 2007, nobody cared about the audio quality back then, right? Nobody cared if it was a professional microphone being used. It was some crappy soap box or shoe box, and that was it, right? So we can still do that today with flash briefings as long as your content is worth sticking around for. And then as you over time get the money to be able to afford, better things, better equipment, then that's just a natural evolution of your content, right?
Hmm. So, speaking of money, how do you monetize? Because at it's and with Game Anglia, we're all full time volunteers. So I completely understand that if you're doing something out of passion, you don't necessarily think about it as monetization first, right? So you
Yeah.
don't have loot boxes for your podcast, for a flash briefing. But is there a way to monetize things on voice devices? Is that
As it
something that's
stands,
possible, or how do you look at it?
Um, it, as it stands, so in the Lexi ecosystem, if you have a custom skill, like a game skill or a lifestyle skill, or anything like that, like the custom skills that you can put on there, the third party ones, they can monetize. So they can say, if you're playing a game, they can say, hey, if you want to access the next level, just throw us $2 and we'll give you the rest of the game, right? There's a lot of people making money that way. And there's also Amazon is coming forward, and if your skill is being used a lot, you can give Amazon will be paying some of those skill developers. As it stands, flash briefings are not a part of that ecosystem, so monetization is nil. But the hope would be, people on YouTube were creating videos for the fun of it, and then all of a sudden it was their career because YouTube came forward and said, here's some money, keep doing this because you're bringing us attention, right? In that vein, I have a lot of people that said the only reason I haven't moved to Google Home is because you are on Lexi. right? So I'm bringing some kind of value to these devices, and my hope would be that at some point Amazon sees the value in this feature, the flash briefing feature, and throw some money to the independent creators that are doing it. Right, that's the perfect world. The other avenue is, I create a really strong relationship with my audience. They really care about the things that I'm saying, and things of that, whatever. Like the relationship is there, and they stick around. And so Patreon is also a really effective tool in that sense. I have a great community over there that, I have a Discord server with my patron supporters, and they've been awesome, and they've supported me through this whole thing for basically nothing in return. I treat it essentially right now as a donation page without too many returned incentives like most Patreon pages, because I'm not driving it as a main factor right now. If I was graduating and I wanted to make the Observer my full time job, I'd be going all in on that. But as it stands, it's just there if you want to say thanks. And it helps support the show for things like paying for the podcast hosting and microphones and stuff like that. So that's been really great. And then other than that, like it's the same monetization tools as you would see for something like Twitch, or for maybe not Twitch because they have their own ecosystem, but podcasting, like sponsors and things like that. I wouldn't want to sponsor the flash briefings because of how short it is. But if I ever expand the content into, if I ever start doing radio shows that are an hour long, or if I'm doing other kinds of content that the audience wants to gravitate to, then that's where sponsorship would come in.
No, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, having a Patreon is really seems to be the way to go at the moment for small independent creators. I see the same with artists, or with indie developers. Steve said that he just added you to his flash briefing.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and Connor's mentioning that he started volunteering because we basically did a talk at his college, and we were like, hey, we're looking for people to help us with community management, so that's why he's one of our moderators. Um, a lot of people are worried about a piece of hardware that listens to them 24/7. What's your take on that?
Security and privacy is a really big issue in the voice first community right now. I can't really speak to any of it because I haven't done the research myself. I do know that there are lots of articles out there that do address it directly, and you can go into the, like, how these devices are set up and the code that goes into them and stuff like that, and you can see exactly how those things are working out. I can't go into the specifications with any authority. The only thing I will say is, like, these companies do have their mind on it. They're promoting that kind of thing a lot, and like Amazon just put in a feature where basically there are humans that will listen to your audio for, like, human feedback. So people working at Amazon will hear your recording of you telling your Alexa to set a timer for 2 minutes or whatever. But you have the option to turn that off. So they just put that in now. So like I said, you would have to do the research into that, but I personally have never been worried about it, because if you have a Facebook profile, I'm sure your data is all over the internet anyway. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean they also have a mute button, as Steve is saying. So, and I mean you're right. It's a totally valid concern, and that's something that we a lot of times take for granted in the world that we live in. But we should be
Yeah.
more questioning of this. So moving back a bit to the content for the observer. Let's go into the question that we were asked earlier. So, do you do any sort of verification for the sources or the veracity of what's being shown to you by the RSS feeds? And kind of like as a continuation to that, what was your favorite or your most important piece that you covered so far?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, for every single story, I try to find as many sources as I can on it and read those articles so I can sort of collate the proper information. I also make a very close point to not report on rumors or hype. I really stay away from those as much as I can. Like if somebody's like, "Oh, I snuck into the patents of Nintendo's newest controller and look at this," I'm not reporting on that, right? I'm not saying anything until they make an official announcement. So even just by staying away from those things, it really makes it a lot easier. But then when it comes to other stories, yeah, I'm always cross referencing with other things, and then even better if I have an official press release that has been sent to me, then I'm obviously looking at that as well. So yeah, I do my best to verify and everything like that. As for, sorry, what was your other question?
What was your favorite or the most important story that you think you
Uh,
reported on so far?
I- One of my favorites has really been the increased attention on proper unionization and game labor, or labor in the games industry. The exposés that Jason Schreier is doing, Cecilia D'Anastasio, they're doing some really fantastic work, and I love those articles, and I love covering those articles because I think they're really important for this industry, and it's something that has been overlooked for way too long and normalized for way too long. And yeah, having that opportunity to learn about it and maybe be a reason that regular consumers are becoming aware of it is something that I really hold highly. As for like my own personal favorites, I'm like a data geek, and I really love when the companies come out with their financials, which is evident in my show. I'm always covering like the numbers of how well a company is doing. So that's just really fun for me, but I can't say it's necessarily like important or anything like that. But
Hmm. No, I think both of those are quite important, especially as a lot of times is contrasted with layoffs, which kind of like feeds into each other. It's like, hey, these guys have reported a record profit.
yeah,
Also, they laid off 800 people. So
yeah,
you know,
that was quite the story. Yeah.
exactly. So we talked a bit before we went live about what you think could be other cool flash briefings to take on for people who may be looking to start into this.
Mhm.
So tell me more about what you think about that. Like you obviously think that there's a lot of white space there at the moment.
It's insane. Like you, if you think about like, okay, there's this idea of a flash briefing. You're going to get your news in 2 to 3 minutes. You would think immediately there's video games, right? Somebody's talking about video games there. And then when I searched, there was IGN who also covers movies and television, and everybody knows them, but they don't solely focus on video games. And there's the Score Esports, so they're covering a niche within the gaming community, right? There was nobody doing video games, and so I just went in there, and then all of a sudden here I am. I'm the number one flash briefing in the US and the UK. Um, so I think any other major niche, like I haven't done a ton of research into other topics, but I know movies is sparse, right? There's no like major or there's no like single flash briefing that is really well known for doing movies. Um, any like there's a lot of sports coverage. There's a lot of voice first technology coverage. So a lot of people are talking about Lexi and all of that stuff. But yeah, anything that you think can provide value to any uh, audience of something, there's space for it there, and it can succeed because this is the platform where people are most likely, in my opinion, are most likely to want to find that because, like I said, it's automatically delivered to them. It's specifically customized to their niche, and they get it in 3 minutes. Right. There was a guy just recently who emailed me to reached out asking for help. He covers news of a single sports team, the Oakland Thunder or something. I'm not a sports guy. Um, he that is his niche. He really loves the sports team. He knows everything about them. He's going to cover them. And I guarantee you that there are dozens and dozens of other people out there that are interested also in that sports team, right? That's just a single sports team. There could be somebody also covering all of football. There could be someone covering all of any other sport, right? Any other niche, knitting, right? You go and look for knitting right now. There's nobody covering knitting, but I guarantee you that there are tons of people using Lexi right now to wind down at the end of the day with some relaxing music while they knit. Wouldn't it be awesome if they got some kind of knitting tip of the day or something like that? You know what I mean? So there's like in my opinion, there's an audience for everything. And even if there's someone established as is, I think there's absolutely room to overcome that. I'm the number one independent game coverage on flash briefings, but I really, really want someone else to come around and tell me that my stuff sucks and theirs is better. Because if they succeed, then the whole flash briefing community is succeeding, right? And there's absolutely room for that. I'm not sitting here pretending like I can't be dethroned, if you want to call it that. Um, so yeah, I think there's room for everything.
Yeah, no, and competition is always good. It's always better for the consumer, right, to actually have the choice.
Absolutely.
As you were saying, it's between IGN and you. It's more or less the same news that are happening every day. In 3 to 4 minutes, the two flash briefings don't necessarily need to touch each other, for example, and
Yep.
they can still add value. So I think that with that there's a lot more to go into there, right? You have so many voice actors out there. You have so many
Hmm.
sound people out there
Oh yeah.
who naturally could gravitate towards this, and it would be interesting to find out more about that.
Absolutely.
There's individual games. There's like AAA games versus indie games. There's I don't know game engines themselves and things like
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah, I mean, if like, especially like, look at Rock Paper Shotgun. They're a website that just covers indie games, right? And there's obviously an audience for it there. And I know there's someone out there who has a microphone, who's ready to talk about indie games all day long, they could capture that niche, right? There's a million preteens who would love Fortnite, and I know that there's someone out there who's ready to talk about Fortnite every single day, and they will capture an audience with that, right? So yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And somebody said that they love your voice. Your career choice definitely suits you.
Well,
Um,
thank you so much.
and somebody else is asking if there's an article that you are unsure if you should cover or not, maybe something controversial or that might spread negativity.
I kind of approach that on a case by case basis. Um, I'm not afraid of shying away from politics, as in like not politics like U.S. politics, but like politics as a concept, because I think that there very often are, like basic human rights that maybe aren't being addressed, and I feel it is important to cover those. At the same time, there are things I'm not worried about controversy, but I'm worried about making statements that I'm uneducated about. So I will shy away if I feel like I'm not educated on a topic. I'm not going to cover it. And then B, if I feel like talking about it, it's my show and I can sort of mold it however I want. Just recently, we had the absolutely horrible mass shootings that happened in the U.S. I chose not to cover that on the show because and the ensuing blame that was put on video games and the ESPN pulling the esports show from their television and all of that stuff. I chose not to cover that because I had a really long day that day and I just didn't feel like people talking about mass shootings. You know, and I went ahead and I told that to my audience. I could be talking about this, but I really don't want to. And I think my audience will understand that, right? And that's not something I have an interest in covering because as well because everyone else is covering it. So if you want that news, you can find it elsewhere. And so yeah, that gives me a little more room to cover the stuff I'm interested in.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think I just realized in terms of the stuff that I have on my flash briefing and the stuff that's out there in general. A lot of the time, it feels like it's really big corporations which are very impersonal, right? So it's like, oh, this is the BBC News. My name is X, and then they just like report. And it's the same with like The Economist. A lot of the time, by talking about yourself and saying, I can't cover this at the moment because, it hasn't been a good day or because I don't have enough time to research and things like that. I feel like there's also something out there from the Twitch side of things and from the
Yeah.
streaming side of things where you're
Hmm.
actually building yourself a community and you're building yourself as a person, not as a
Yes.
service.
It is, and that's something that's actually a point I should have made a lot earlier. Is that the reason I think a big pillar of why I've been so successful is because of that trust and that relationship that has been formed. People saying that I'm a part of their morning routine. It's not because of my show and the content. It's because of me, right? And everything that goes along with that. At the same time, I've talked to so many people that are like, it's so weird to hear your voice, and it's so weird to be able to talk to you one on one because they're so used to feeling like I'm with them in the mornings, but not actually being able to respond. Right. So,
Yeah, and as Connor's saying, with traveling becoming more and more of our daily routine as you're commuting to work or to uni or wherever, voice is hopefully going to take off. That's how podcasts took off. That's how audiobooks took off. And
absolutely.
it's really good to have choice. But looking at the Gaming Observer, as we've been talking, you've been doing it for a little bit over 1 year now. So where do you think the show? Where do you think you are headed? And kind of like, what are the biggest challenges that you see going forward?
It's an impossible answer. Last year, imagine like how could I ever predict where I am now? You know, like I said, my content wouldn't have survived on YouTube. How could I have predicted it would have exploded like this? What is it a year from now? I have no idea. Um, does Amazon pull flash briefings from their services and my show goes kaputs? Right? Does Amazon all of a sudden say, "Hey, we're going to be throwing a ton of money at this," and I drop out of school to do this full time? Right? Uh, do like it is impossible to know where that's going. If you look in the long term, my ideal is that the Gaming Observer becomes a brand that, and it already is in a way, but becomes a brand that exceeds flash briefings. It becomes an entity of its own, and it exists everywhere. It's on YouTube. It's on a website. It's wherever the people are. And then I don't have to worry about what Amazon is going to do. And I would really love to expand past the 3 minute time constraint that I'm in. I would love to start a podcast that is an hour long that only talks about the news, right? Without any of the fluff. Kind of in the same vein that flash briefings are. That's only 3 minutes. So you have to cut the bull, right? You just have to get right into the stories and get out. I'm interested in doing that in an hour long format where I'm only talking about the news for an hour. But right now, I don't have the capacity for that. I don't have the people for that. And certainly, there's not an audience for that right now. But long term, that's something I'm interested in developing. I'm interested in developing a team of people that are working with me to cover as much as possible, and not like still with a level of depth, but in a way of that like I can only cover so much as one person. And I would love to have experts of if there was if I could have someone on my team that is an expert of esports and there's an esports division of the Gaming Observer, like I would love something like that, right? So that that's super long term, obviously. But yeah, I mean, as it stands, it's impossible to tell what's going to happen. It's really impossible.
I mean, the good part of it is that you still have the passion. You're still doing this, and it's a matter of it growing and then you finding those opportunities. You mentioned earlier that you're actually going to be speaking. So speaking at an event. So tell us
Yeah.
more about that.
So there's a man who works in the voice first sphere. He is the, I believe, producer or founder of Score Publishing. His name is Bradley Metrock, and he's a really big figure in the voice first technology sector. And he's also a really big gamer. And I reached out to him at one point, just saying hi because I wanted to make connections in this industry. And he was like, "How have I not heard of you? I'm a big gamer. I love your show. All of a sudden, I'm putting together a conference in January. I want to fly you out, and I want you to speak at it." So that's kind of how that happened. But yeah, in January, I'll be in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Project Voice Conference. I'll be having two 30-minute talks, which is really cool. And then this October, if anybody listening now is interested in maybe starting their own flash briefing, in October, there is a online webcast called Voice of the Flash Briefing. So you can go to voiceofthe.flashbriefing.com and it has all the information there. And it's basically, I think it's like 10 people who create flash briefings are just one after another talking about their experiences, what's so great about flash briefings, what successes they've seen. Maybe there will be people in there telling you how to set one up or something. I don't know exactly yet because it's still a few months away. But I'm closing out that one, so I'm the last one speaking on that show. And there's a few more announcements that I can't make yet, but there are some other things coming up there. And so it's been really like that one really blew me out of the water. The fact that they're like all of a sudden I was just being flown out to the other side of the continent to speak at a conference is just insane. And then also I was mentioning also before this stream that I've made a lot of connections in the gaming industry, people who listen to my show reaching out saying hello, that they're happy that I exist and that they get value out of my show. I've had some of the executives of like the voice first industry reach out and say we want your show on our platform, or you're doing great work, keep it up, or anything like that. So yeah, making these like high level, I don't want to say high level connections, but these experiences that are I'm never going to forget my first time talking at a conference. So yeah, it's really been fascinating.
That truly is like a unique feeling, and I do hope that you're going to have fun and that your talks are going to be well attended.
I hope
Um,
so. Yeah.
and if you're ever in the UK, just give us a shout, and we'll see how we can meet up and see if we can arrange something on
Yeah.
our side. Um, Somebody says if only they didn't have roticism and a harsh voice, they'd start their own flash briefing. I think there my personal reply would be, well, gorillas is a thing, and there's a plenty of options to be able to mask your voice or to digitally generate it if you
Uh,
want to do something like that.
Rhoticism and a harsh voice in my opinion, is not a barrier to this at all. Actually, I think you, regardless of, you can look at some of the most popular YouTube channels in the world. They're not great speakers. They didn't start as great speakers. Some of them have harsh voices or rhoticism. It is absolutely not like a barrier to entry. And while it might be one on YouTube right now, it wasn't in 2007, and it isn't now on flash briefings. As long as you're passionate about something, you're putting out quality content, people are going to stick around. Just like it doesn't matter what your mic quality is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. And I personally, I know the famous influencers even on YouTube who do have roticism, and it's just part of their personality,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And people, and even then, like maybe someone who's listening also has roticism, and you are now a someone they look up to, right? An example of someone who has succeeded with the same, thing that you have. Um, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Steve's telling us that if anybody's close to Cambridge, that's Cambridge, UK, not Cambridge, Ontario, or something like
Yeah,
that.
my
Uh,
mom was there.
there's an Alexa meetup group and an Amazon free skill workshop there as well. So if anybody wants to go and join that, that's doable. And yeah, it would be cool to see more skills out there in the world.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that's another point that a lot of people bring up is it's like there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. There's a few thousand flash briefings, and think about all of the different topics that podcasts cover. All of the different possible things you could listen to, and there's an audience there for flash briefings. So why not, right?
Yeah, and I think even when you look at the target at the size of the market out there, there's over what 5 million systems have been sold. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's also the number one seller every single Prime Amazon Prime sale. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's about it from me. If anybody else in the community has any other questions, let us know. And other than that, Adrian, what are your thoughts so far on the conversation?
Oh, I mean, this was excellent. Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you for having me. If there's anyone in the audience watching now, or if you're watching this in retrospect, you're more than welcome to reach out if you want to start your own flash briefing or have any questions along the way or anything like that. Info@thegamingobserver.com. I'm happy to help you out free of charge, and just to get you set up or answer any questions you might have. So
That's really cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the offer.
yeah, no worries.
And I really do hope that your events are gonna go okay, and
Yeah,
hopefully you're going to like you're talking about what's gonna happen by next year. I hope that you're gonna get to over 10,000 dailies. That'd be cool.
yeah. I mean, it's certainly something to look forward to, and it's easy to fantasize what this become, right? What it could become.
Yeah, exactly. Mircha says thanks for being here and for your encouraging tips.
Absolutely no worries at all. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Thanks a lot for your time, Adrian. And that's an ambulance. And or a police car. And with that being said, that's the end of today's exclusive game Anglia Network Talk. We are going to be back. Actually, instead of being back 2 weeks from now, we're going to be back next Thursday with Felicia from Finland, and we're going to be talking about sound accessibility, actually,
Ah,
and accessibility in general in games, as well as what it's like being a voiceover artist. So
awesome.
yeah, looking forward to that. And we're going to be posting more details on our Twitter and on the official Game Anglia Network Discord. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. And thank you,
Thanks,
Adrian,
everyone.
again.
Thank you so much. Anytime.
Cool. Have a nice evening. Bye.